Across the Philippines, battling nature's fury is a part of life and death. Floods, earthquakes, and typhoons ravage this nation with terrifying frequency. But amid the chaos and devastation, some of the country's largest corporations are finding golden opportunities to profit from the misery. I'm Steve Chow. On this edition of 101 East, we investigate the rise of disaster capitalism in the Philippines.
The Philippine island of Leyte is no stranger to catastrophe. I was here 5 years ago when it was still reeling from Super Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest storm to ever hit the country. More than 6,000 people were killed and 4 million displaced by Haiyan's fury. Across Leyte Island, towns were flattened, bodies buried in the rubble. Tanawan was one of the hardest hit cities.
It came so fast. It came so fast, and this was...
I first met Mayor Pel Texon in the aftermath of the disaster. His hometown was in crisis. Hundreds were dead or missing and the city destroyed. The town hall was transformed into an emergency medical centre.
It's really good to see you again.
It's a very different scene today.
So this is your amphitheatre and public space that you've redeveloped essentially, yeah?
Exactly. This is our living room in the town. So we have to...
Pel proudly shows me Tanawan's new town square. An amphitheatre, sporting complex and memorial site have been built with the help of corporate investors. It's an amazing transformation, considering this area was a temporary morgue during the crisis.
Yeah, there are over 600 bodies, loved ones here in the mass grave. But we wanted people to be comfortable back again in the plaza here. Okay, this is not something, that the children should be scared of, and I'm very happy that life is back here in Tanawan.
Resilience is a point of pride here, and Pel says it's the island's people who deserve much of the credit for its revival.
I will tell you it's the people. I'm very proud of the people of Tanawan and the people of Leyte in general.
But there's another factor driving the recovery of towns across Leyte. Big corporations.
I truly believe that the partnership of the private and the government sector is very important. It has to be there. So that's why the rehabilitation here in Tanawan, in Leyte in general, was very fast.
He admits storm survivors do still need help, but insists poverty rates are dropping thanks to the corporate sector.
As more investments come to Tanawan, part of the arrangements is for them to hire local folks to work for them. Okay, so this will create job opportunities.
Some critics have said that the rebuilding of post-Haiyan communities has been very investment-oriented and communities are being denied access to the wealth that's being generated. As a mayor of one of these communities, is that a fair observation?
I do not think so. Those two go hand in hand, Drew. Okay, investment is there for development to happen. Okay, it's part part of the strategy.
Typhoon Haiyan marked a dramatic change in how the Philippines responded to disasters. For the first time ever, the government asked 20 private corporations to lead rebuilding.
Nobody was gonna take over.
Danilo Antonio was second in charge at the National Reconstruction Agency, set up to help Haiyan survivors. With over 35 years of corporate experience, Danilo says he encouraged his boss, Senator Panfilo Lacson, to tap the country's biggest companies for help.
With my experience in the private sector, my network was wide. I was practically dealing with all the major conglomerates in the Philippines. So everybody was a friend. So when I called upon them, in saying, we need you here to help. They said, hey, we're all too willing to help. Just tell us how and when and where and how much. That's why we were able to channel a lot of them pretty fast.
So you were the brainchild of the private sector response?
Yes, because I thought I'm from the private sector. I'm a real estate practitioner. I have absolutely no experience in government. When Senator or when Secretary Lacson invited me, I felt like I won the lottery. Okay.
Rosario Bella Guzman leads IBON, an NGO which monitors the rebuilding of typhoon-affected areas. She says the private sector was keen to cash in on the disaster.
Typhoon Haiyan actually, it was the beginning of a very, very bad reconstruction program. The plan is focused on infrastructure because infrastructure is more lucrative than building houses, building resettlement sites. They want to profit from it. And that's disaster capitalism at its finest.
Disaster capitalism is a term that describes big companies exploiting catastrophe for profit. And Rosario says here, in one of the world's most disaster-prone nations, the government helps them do it.
Actually, in the Philippine sense, this is a way of your local government getting its share of the loot, if I should say that. Getting its share of how the private corporations are making money out of the trauma or the shock that these people have after the disaster. And they're really making a killing.
While local governments denied directly profiting from the disaster, it appears companies are benefiting from official policies. Soon after Typhoon Haiyan struck, the Philippines government declared no building would be allowed within 40 metres of the coastline. But then they changed the rules. Companies have been given the green light to build businesses on this prime real estate.
If you are really concerned about the future hazards of another storm surge, then why would you build something here? This is disaster capitalism Philippine style.
Now storm survivors who ignored the housing ban and rebuilt their lives along the coast are receiving eviction notices.
Here, it's the community, but the government calls them informal dwellers. So it's so easy to remove them, get them out of the way so that corporations can cash in or can speculate on the land value and eventually set up hotels.
Across the central Philippines, the government promised to build 205,000 houses for storm survivors. But only a third of them have been completed. At Ridgeview Park, 10 kilometres inland, we visit one of the few new housing estates on Leyte. Built in 2015, residents tell Rosario that many of these homes have already fallen into disrepair.
Eh, yung kubeta, gumagana.
Gumagana yan, pero ang tubig nandyan lang sa loob. Hindi nakakalabas.
Ano yung sinasalok nyo palabas?
Oo, sasalokin pa palabas.
May sili.
Tumutulo yan sa taas. Pag umulan, baha kami rito.
Well, you've seen the houses, they're really substandard. The construction is substandard. Electricity is connected to a main post, so it's not really available in the houses. Water is being fetched from a tank. It's being delivered by a private corporation.
Rosario says the biggest problem is these housing estates are too remote, far away from public transport, business areas and the coastline.
A lot of them used to be fisher folk, but now they don't have the ocean. They don't have their boats, so they just have odd jobs. This place is bereft of social services, is bereft of livelihood opportunities. It's not what a relocation site should be.
While housing for storm survivors appears to be a low priority, construction of this 27-kilometre seawall is going full steam ahead. Locals call it the Great Wall of Leyte, but Rosario is unimpressed, arguing such projects only benefit the construction companies building them. And she says it won't even do its job of protecting people from terrifying storm surges in the future.
First of all, it's too low. The highest it can get would be 4 meters. Storm surge reached 3-story high. Actually, they had to kill about 100 hectares of mangroves, which are natural storm surge protectors, just to build a wall. So that's crazy. They have been actually making the people more vulnerable to disasters by their own policies and by their own profiteering.
Danilo Antonio defends the reconstruction role of corporations, saying in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, government departments couldn't move fast enough.
The problem is the government sector not doing its job. It was the private sector who came in with their, all of their equipment, manpower, choppers coming in, their generators. They were there immediately because they had the resources, no? Everybody with private planes from the private sector just say, if you need our planes and pilots, just holler and we'll make them available. If we have to go through the government machinery just to get a plane ticket, we'll never get anywhere. So that's how we could travel, all over the place. They just wanted to help.
"44 Philippine provinces across 19 islands were affected by Typhoon Haiyan. The government divided up the crisis zone and allowed corporations to choose which areas they wanted to rebuild.
So that's why I proposed that we group the entire devastated regions into 24 parts, okay? Each part to be organized on the recovery basis by one principal corporate sponsor, because that's normally what we do also in the very big real estate development.
Were businesses promised anything in return for helping with the recovery process?
None. Zero. None at all.
At the time, what mechanisms were in place to hold them accountable, given this was the first time that the private sector was involved in disaster recovery?
At that particular, there wasn't any existing mechanism then.
West of Leyte, Sicagon is a tiny island boasting pristine picture postcard beauty. After Haiyan, one of the nation's largest business conglomerates, Ayala, volunteered to help rebuild. It already had plans to turn the island into a multi-million-dollar ecotourism destination. They partnered with Citico, a company which already owns 70% of the island and has operated resorts here for nearly 50 years.
In the Philippines, Sicagon is known as Paradise Island, and from here, it's easy to see why.
About 6,000 people used to call Sicagon home, until they were displaced by the storm. Now, only a few scattered villages remain. Village Chief Winifred Gonzalez says many were blocked by the two companies from returning.
So how many people live on this hill?
Some of those who did return are now forced to squat on a small piece of public land.
People living here, people without any option.
So it's a desperate situation.
Yeah, very desperate situation.
He says the remaining residents are being threatened with eviction so that Ayala can build new tourist ventures.
Yung nangyayari ngayon sa Sicagon ay talagang disaster.
What happened in Sicagon is disaster capitalism. They took advantage of the situation after the tragedy. They are the only one benefiting. They left the people here with nothing. They are only thinking of themselves.
A month before Haiyan struck, a government agriculture scheme granted parcels of farmland to more than 200 households. The resort company, Citico, contested the decision in court because it would have forced them to hand over a third of their land. But when the typhoon hit, it changed everything. Winifred alleges that with almost all the homes and buildings destroyed, Citico and Ayala had the real estate opportunity of a lifetime.
You can see a typhoon coming and you know it will destroy you in a day. but you can't see how they are going to destroy you. It's difficult to fight these people. They have a strong connection with our government.
Danilo Antonio defends the company's actions.
A lot of these people were illegal settlers there. Okay, what the private sector who owned the properties couldn't do, Haiyan did for them. I mean, they got wiped out. So of course, when they're no longer there, private sector would protect their own properties. You see, it wasn't a disaster that they created.
This is a compromise framework of agreement.
We've uncovered legal documents that show Ayala and Sidiko asked the villagers to surrender any claims to their land and leave Sikagon. In return, they would receive a $3,000 cash payout or $100 and a house on a nearby island. Raul Ramos, a village elder, represented the residents in negotiations with the companies.
They took advantage of the situation that the people are starving for food. They are very hungry. They have no source of livelihood. Their boats were all smashed by the typhoon.
Even though Ayala, as a reconstruction partner, was supposed to help the island's residents, Raul alleges the company only gave them meagre rations, so they would be forced out.
They appeal to the local government to give assistance to the community. They told to us that Ayala will give us securities and food, but they did not give.
Fisherman Anacito Mercurio took the money because he thought it would be enough to feed his 6 children and build a new home. But he says, like most villagers who took the deal, he was poor again after just a few months.
In hindsight, was this a good deal to sign?
I regret signing the deal. I took a chance on it out of desperation because we were so badly affected. But I have nothing left.
In 2014, a year after the storm hit, Anacito took a job back in Sikagon as a security guard for Ayala and Sidiko. He alleges the guards harassed and attacked storm survivors who refused to leave. Anacito recalls one disturbing incident.
They destroyed their house and told them to leave. They even fired a gun next to a pregnant woman.
He also confirms the 2 companies wrote this memo, instructing all nearby boat operators and village chiefs to stop supplying building materials to Sikagon's storm survivors. Anacito alleges that security guards like him were given similar instructions and says it was a way to pressure the villagers to give up their land.
Yes, sir. I've got that, sir.
Yes, we received this memo. We made sure to block the boats so nobody could bring in any building materials to rebuild their houses. All materials, we didn't let it in, including cement. We didn't allow it into the ports. Most of the supplies were coming from NGOs, but we did not allow it. After I saw this, I felt very embarrassed about what it was I was doing, because I knew a lot of my relatives had houses that were destroyed just like mine. But I still followed the orders.
As tensions on the island rose, government agencies struck a compromise deal. If the villagers gave unconditional support to Ayala and Sidiko's tourist ventures, the companies would supply a resettlement site, farmland, and more than $700,000 for a work training scheme. As soon as the deal was signed, Ayala started building a new resort and the airport. But residents allege that neither Ayala nor Sidiko have delivered on any of their promises to the islanders.
Hindi naman gusto nila ya kontrolon ang community dire. Ang ibilin dire sa mula na ti matabaton na tas na gusto kanila i-content kita sa isa lang ka area
At nagkaroon ng win-win solution na magkakaroon silang
They came out with an agreement, but that agreement was useless. It only benefited their own development.
Mga development lang nila yung develop nila at saka yung sa tao ay walang nangyari.
Sidiko declined an interview, but in a written response, they call the allegations false and malicious. But in the capital, Manila, Ayala do agree to speak to us. At their main office, I meet with one of the company's directors, Ruel Marinan. He heads the philanthropic arm of the company.
Did Ayala exploit its position as a rehabilitation partner to attain prime real estate on Sicagon?
I think the term exploit might be too harsh for us because we are very transparent and authentic with our plans, and these are actually shared to the right channels, particularly to the local government units. Actually, such disaster is way beyond business initiative. In Ayala's case, actually, what we saw was an opportunity to respond to those who are affected.
I show him the letters written by Sidiko and Ayala that order boats to stop delivering supplies to storm survivors less than a year after Typhoon Haiyan hit Sicagon.
What I just don't understand is I was there during Haiyan, during this time of calamity. I just don't understand how it is responsible behaviour from, anyone.
Well, I totally agree with you, but again, I would want to understand further the context of how it was being offered and such refusal happened.
Will you investigate this directive?
Well, now that you extend it to us, and if it really affects our own organization, definitely we'll look into the veracity of this.
When we asked if the company will deliver on its agreement to the residents, something that has not happened for the last 4 years, he gave a very carefully worded response.
Definitely, we will uphold the agreement that are within the legal bounds that we have entered. Now, if there will be certain developments, then we will keep our options open to determine what is mutually beneficial to all stakeholders.
Ayala continues to be on the front line of disaster recovery through its involvement in the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, or PDRF. Praised by the UN, the foundation opened the world's first private emergency operations centre in April. 80 major Filipino businesses are members of the organisation. Together they have partnered with the government to provide disaster education programs, deliver relief, and coordinate national emergency responses. The president of the foundation, Butch Maley, sees it as a model of corporate response that can be used in other developing countries.
It's not just groundbreaking for the Philippines, it's groundbreaking for the rest of the world. It's become a role model, actually, for everybody else.
But critics describe the PDRF as another form of disaster capitalism.
Actually, the PDRF has to be rented by the local governments. It's not a benevolent act on the part of the Ayalas. It's a structure, just like any other infrastructure, that when you use it, the government has to pay for it. You can call it public-private partnership, but it's really the government subsidizing the profit of the corporation.
Is the PDRF just an easy way for companies to further entrench themselves in the profits of building infrastructure after a big disaster?
I don't see that at all. I know that there's a natural suspicion, particularly on the part of the humanitarian sector or other parts. There's a natural skepticism perhaps towards business, if there's always a gain or a profit motive behind it.
But he concedes there are incentives.
Well, for one thing, they want to be seen as good corporate citizens. So it's good public relations. The other element is that for a company, it makes good business sense to get the economy up and running, to get their customers able to pay for their services. And so there is an element of self-interest there.
Meanwhile, on Sicagon, community leader Winifred Gonzalez fears if corporations are left in charge of disaster relief, what happened on his island will happen again to other communities.
It's not fair that this happens. If they like your island, they will do anything they can to chase the people out, all for their own interests.
But he says the island's residents will not give up.
We have no choice but to face it. It is our rights that we are fighting for. We should not just surrender our humanity or our dignity to these rich people. Because if we give this to them, what is left for us? Nothing.
When the Philippines is hit by disaster, the world's attention is focused on the immediate horror. But for many survivors here, the hardship continues for years after. In a poor archipelago at the mercy of typhoons and tycoons.